Is Trump a narcissist? Here at Psych by AI, we get an AI to analyze an individual and then assess the results. Specifically, we'll explore whether Trump displays characteristics commonly linked to narcissism or sociopathy. Using AI to analyze an individual is one of the latest innovations in psychological research, and when we assess sociopathy, we look at 5 major aspects: empathy, manipulation, grandiosity, disregard for rules, and chronic lying. Let's break down these traits and see how they align with Trump's behavior. One of the hallmark traits of sociopathy is a profound lack of empathy. This means the inability to understand or share the feelings of others. Sociopaths tend to be indifferent or even cruel to people's suffering, failing to recognize the emotional impact their actions might have. In the case of Donald Trump, his public actions and statements have often showcased a shocking dismissal of human suffering, which some critics argue signals a lack of empathy. Dismissal of suffering. Take, for example, his response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. The hurricane wreaked havoc on the island, causing significant loss of life and displacement. Trump's response to the disaster was widely criticized as tone-deaf and emotionally detached. Rather than offering genuine condolences or demonstrating concern for the victims, Trump's comments focused more on the financial cost of the disaster and the logistical challenges facing the U.S. mainland. Perhaps the most infamous moment came when Trump tossed paper towels into a crowd of survivors, almost treating the dire situation as an opportunity for spectacle. To many, this act seemed more like a show of vanity rather than empathy for those suffering. His comments about Puerto Ricans wanting to do a great job with the recovery efforts also underscored his tendency to focus on political optics rather than actual human lives. Insensitive remarks. Another example of Trump's lack of empathy can be seen in his repeated dehumanization of immigrants and minorities. During his 2016 presidential campaign, Trump notoriously referred to Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, despite no factual evidence to support this sweeping generalization. His rhetoric about immigrant groups was often framed in a way that stripped individuals of their humanity and complexities, reducing them to a monolithic stereotype. Trump's use of phrases like shithole countries, referring to African nations, further exemplifies his failure to see people as complex individuals. This kind of dehumanizing language is characteristic of sociopathic tendencies, treating groups of people as less than human and unworthy of empathy or compassion. Mocking the disabled. Perhaps one of the most shocking examples of Trump's disregard for empathy came when he mocked Serge Kowaleski, a reporter with a physical disability. Trump imitated Kowaleski's movements in a way that many observers interpreted as mocking and cruel. For a sociopath, actions like these are often carried out without any understanding of the emotional harm they cause to others. When confronted about this incident, Trump showed little remorse, which is a typical response from individuals with sociopathic traits. Sociopaths are often skilled manipulators. They know how to charm, deceive, and coerce people to achieve their own personal gain, often with little regard for the harm they cause others. Donald Trump's behavior, both in business and politics, often reflects these manipulative tendencies. Spreading misinformation. One of the clearest examples of manipulation in Trump's career is his insistence that the 2020 election was stolen. Despite no credible evidence of widespread voter fraud, Trump spent months pushing a narrative that undermined the legitimacy of the election results. His baseless claims of a rigged system were meant to manipulate his followers into a sense of outrage and betrayal, creating an alternate reality where his loss was unthinkable. This manipulation of public perception was not limited to the election. Trump frequently exaggerated or distorted facts about his own accomplishments. Whether it was claiming to be the wealthiest president or overstating his role in certain business deals, Trump repeatedly used deception as a tool to create a larger-than-life image. Trump's relationships with others often appear to be highly transactional. People are either useful to him or they are discarded. In his business dealings, Trump has been accused of using contractors, employees, and partners for his own benefit, only to discard them once they are no longer valuable. His business bankruptcies and repeated renegotiation of deals have often left others holding the bag, while Trump emerges relatively unscathed. For instance, the collapse of Trump's casinos in Atlantic City caused significant financial loss to creditors, employees, and the local economy, Yet Trump himself was able to avoid any lasting damage to his personal fortune. In politics, Trump demonstrated a similar transactional approach. His alliances were often short-lived, and he was willing to sacrifice political allies for personal gain. For example, the impeachment hearings over his pressure on Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden in exchange for military aid exposed how willing Trump was to manipulate others for his own advantage. Sociopaths often exhibit grandiosity, a pervasive sense of superiority and entitlement. They believe they are exceptional, and they frequently exaggerate their abilities and accomplishments. This inflated sense of self-worth often leads to an obsession with admiration and validation. Inflated sense of importance. Trump's public persona has been steeped in grandiosity from the start. He frequently claims to be the best at everything, from being a businessman to being a president. He has made statements like, "I'm the best president this country has ever had," and "I'm the greatest dealmaker," despite facing criticism from multiple corners. This tendency to self-aggrandize is a key characteristic of sociopathy. Trump's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," was also rooted in a belief that only he, and no one else, could accomplish such a monumental task. This idea of being the sole person capable of restoring greatness reflects a narcissistic belief in one's unparalleled significance. Refusal to acknowledge mistakes. Sociopaths rarely admit fault, as doing so would threaten their inflated self-image. This is evident in Trump's reluctance to acknowledge any significant mistakes or failures. A prime example is his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite overwhelming evidence that his administration's response was inadequate, Trump consistently downplayed the severity of the virus and claimed that the U.S. had done a great job. This type of deflection and refusal to take accountability is a clear example of grandiosity in action. Even when faced with significant public backlash, Trump's need for validation often overshadowed the actual crisis. His rhetoric minimized the severity of the pandemic, focusing instead on maintaining his image as a strong leader. A common trait among sociopaths is a blatant disregard for societal norms, laws, and moral codes. They often act impulsively and recklessly, without regard for the long-term consequences of their actions. This disregard for rules is evident throughout Trump's career. Flouting legal boundaries. Trump has repeatedly shown a willingness to disregard legal and ethical boundaries, both in business and in politics. In his business dealings, he has used bankruptcy laws to avoid paying debts, leaving creditors with little recourse while he walked away unscathed. This pattern of exploiting legal loopholes is a common trait of sociopathy, acting in one's own self-interest without regard for others. As president, Trump was impeached twice, a historical first. The first impeachment stemmed from his attempt to leverage military aid to pressure Ukraine into investigating Joe Biden, which many saw as an abuse of power. The second impeachment was related to his role in inciting the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Both instances demonstrated his willingness to break norms and laws to maintain his position and influence. Reckless pandemic response. Trump's approach to the COVID-19 pandemic further illustrated his disregard for public health and safety. By downplaying the virus, pushing unproven treatments, and undermining scientific experts, Trump's actions contributed to the loss of life. His primary concern seemed to be his public image and political survival rather than the well-being of the American people. Similarly, his refusal to accept the results of the 2020 election, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, culminated in the storming of the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. This reckless behavior, inciting an insurrection, demonstrated an utter disregard for the rule of law and the democratic process. Finally, a defining feature of sociopathy is chronic lying, habitual dishonesty that is used to manipulate, control, and shape public perception. Sociopaths lie without hesitation and often seem unaware of the harm their lies cause. Misinformation and exaggeration. Trump's presidency was marked by a constant stream of misinformation. He regularly spread falsehoods about a wide range of topics, from the rigged 2016 election to the false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. These lies were not just about trivial matters. They were central to his political strategy and designed to manipulate his followers into accepting a version of reality that served his interests. Trump has also been caught exaggerating his own success and wealth. He frequently claimed to be a billionaire, but investigations into his finances have cast doubt on those claims. Whether it was the size of his inaugural crowd or the amount of wealth he possessed, Trump's habit of inflating the truth was a consistent theme throughout his public life. Is Trump a sociopath? In conclusion, the evidence suggests that Donald Trump exhibits several sociopathic traits. Whether or not Trump fits the clinical definition of sociopathy, these traits have undeniably influenced his actions, both in business and in politics. His pattern of disregarding others' well-being, bending the truth, and breaking norms to achieve personal goals paints a picture of a highly self-centered individual. For those who study human behavior, the red flags are clear. Overall, we would say that the analysis of Trump is accurate to a fault.